Today, I am really pleased and honored to welcome to the studio Roy Snell. Roy is the co-founder and former CEO of the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics and the Healthcare Compliance Association, also known as the SCCE and the HCCA. And today we are going to talk about Roy's new book, The Accidental Compliance Professional: Lessons Learned from 23 Years in the Industry. Roy, welcome.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here. This was a wonderful book, and I'm really excited to talk about it.
Thank you.
Now, normally I would introduce you and talk a little bit about your background and experience, but I'll tell you what, why don't you tell us how you got to be the accidental compliance professional?
I was working for a fella at the University of Wisconsin in Madison at their medical foundation. His name was Mark Duttman. He eventually became my most important mentor. He and I were walking down the hall one day, and he was reading a corporate integrity agreement from the University of Pennsylvania. And he says, it says here that they're being forced to hire a compliance officer. He said, maybe we should do that before they come tell us to do that. Why don't you do it? And I said, sure, I'd be glad to do it, having not a clue what any of it meant. And that little sentence in that moment was changed a lot of things for me. And to his credit, this was 23 years ago. He was very insightful to have seen all this coming and done something long before most did.
So prior to your co-founding the SCCE and the HCCA, can you share a little bit about your professional experience from that accidental sentence until you got us to the SCCE and HCCA?
Right. I've one accident after another. My college degrees weren't very marketable, but I had a hobby of computer science, computer programming, and got a job, ironically, at the University of Wisconsin many years prior to the story I just told.
Okay.
I worked there twice. And from there, I did a little sales of hardware and software, and then went to the Mayo Clinic for 10 years, starting out in the IT department and then moved into administration. From there, I got the job in Wisconsin. I actually followed Mark. I'd worked for him at Mayo. He went to Madison. I followed him there. I did 2 short stints at Deloitte and PricewaterhouseCoopers in consulting. And then at that time it was just the HCCA board came to me and said, we need a full-time CEO. Would you be willing to do it? And I was, and I did.
So let's pick it up from there. And Roy, I think the theme for our discussion is going to be, let's make the difficult the discussable, right? And really look at some very, very challenging issues. So let's talk about how we can help the Chief Compliance Officer. And Roy, there are a number of chapters in the book that I found very helpful in this regard. So let's start with your chapter titled Influence. What does that mean to you, and what should it mean to a compliance officer?
About 8 years ago, I began to feel as though we were teaching and studying too much of the technical aspects of the job. Not too much, but it wasn't balanced with the skills that you need to be an effective compliance officer, interpersonal skills.
So too much on rules, policies, and procedures.
Right, how to audit, how to monitor, how to investigate, how to set up a hotline. It was all very helpful, but what a lot of people were struggling with was getting a bigger budget, getting more time of the employees for education, heaven forbid, fixing the politically sensitive problem that nobody wanted to fix.
Untouchable problems.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
and those were all interpersonal skills. And so I went to Jenny O'Brien, who is currently at United, and Kim Otte, who's compliance officer at Mayo, and we asked them to do a session on influence at one of our conferences. It went over so well in a general session that we asked to do it again, and it ended up that I and Jenny did it. They had developed 7 characteristics of influence.
Okay.
Jenny and I modified it a bit. We did the presentation, and I think it was well received. I ask people every once in a while at conferences, think of the most impressive, effective compliance professional you know. And I ask them to tell me, not their name, but what is it about them that makes them effective? And they always describe interpersonal skills, the ability to motivate, collaborate, compromise, communicate, influence. But if you ask somebody what's the most important part of a compliance program, they'll answer the understanding of the rule of law, or building an ethical culture, or auditing, or investigating. I think there's a disconnect. And I think you worded it pretty interestingly in the introduction, is I tried to talk about topics in the book that are not easily discussed, which might be one of the reasons why we don't see it discussed a lot, because the esoteric parts of the job are not mechanical, they're intellectual or something. And I tried to tell them through stories, a lot of stories of my failure, what I learned.
Well, now, when you talk about influence, are you thinking about how to influence the commercial workforce, for example, the people that might have that first-line exposure to risk? Are you also talking about influencing above or managing above, or across boundaries in terms of the support functions, or all of the above?
Of course, it is all of it.
Okay.
You're, as I mentioned, you've got to influence leadership to constantly be putting out the message of support for ethics and compliance. You've got to try and influence department heads to become a part of the compliance program, and you've got to influence the employees to take it seriously and understand their risks, and to be supportive. I think, oddly enough, maybe the biggest influence we could be is just helping people understand what it is. There's a great misunderstanding of check the box police work, investigations are part of it, but people don't understand the spirit of compliance, which, by the way, I'm hoping that this book could be given to some of those people.
Sure.
Who, from those who read it, who say, I want to influence my leadership or department heads. This book might help explain compliance in a different way and better influence them to be more supportive or understanding.
Yeah, and going back to my commercial self, I talk about that in the spirit of, this is how we keep people successful and safe.
I thought about that on the way here. Is you have spent a great deal of time over the last few years doing a couple things. You and I haven't talked about it much. I imagine some of this, so you correct me if I'm wrong, but you're talking to people who are in sales jobs and in other jobs that get close to risk.
Sure.
And saying, this is how you might view it now. This is how you maybe should view it. This is how you should be more careful and respectful of the rules, how you might get in trouble. I want to help you not to get into trouble.
Right.
And then also going to their leadership and telling them how to do the same. Educate and monitor their staff to keep them out of trouble. I think that's a real great misconception, is the compliance people want to go get folks and get bad guys. No, we really want to go help people get out of trouble. I'll tell you one real quick story. The medical director when I was a compliance officer said something that could have been deemed as derogatory against compliance in a compliance committee meeting. And I talked to my boss, and I asked what I should do, and he said, talk to him, which terrified me. And I went into the medical director, and I said, you said this. It could be interpreted this way. If we're ever investigated, they're going to try and find out if leadership was supportive. People might repeat that. Part of my job is to help you stay out of trouble. I can't have you saying that sort of thing. And he said, thank you. And
He appreciated that.
He did. And I said, thank you, and left. My stepmother once told me, once I get what I'm looking for, to just stop talking.
Don't make that sale twice. It's a good one.
Exactly.
So part of what I've seen over the years, and you talked a little bit about this in your chapter, is how to build a network of compliance ambassadors who are people embedded in the workforce to help build that influence. And I've seen that concept work really well in organizations, and more are trying to embrace that. But for Roy, for an organization that doesn't have that network of compliance deputies or ambassadors, any best practices that you've seen as to where they can get started? And how to sort of build and maintain that network?
Most of my answers aren't too many easy ways. They're just long, slow slog. I probably put an idea in people's heads with the title of that lesson about ambassadors that I maybe did not necessarily intend to. I wouldn't necessarily give them names. What I would do is have that thought, though. I would say to all department heads and leaders that have employees that they could educate about the rule of law that affects their risk areas and be supportive of compliance and that sort of thing. I would think of them as ambassadors, but I wouldn't necessarily call them that or let them know that was on my mind. I would just go see them on a regular basis, one-on-one, and in groups, take every opportunity I could to help peel away the misunderstanding of compliance being this check the box, fill out forms and investigate people. That it's really more complicated than that. And so if you could get people to understand it better, they would kind of smack their forehead and say, I get it, I want to do it, I want to help. And then in a way they'll be ambassadors, even though that name may not be used, and constantly be supportive of compliance. You'll know you win if after some education occurs that you do, and the employees go back and complain in their department about something related to it all, and then rather than their supervisor saying, yeah, I know this stuff, we just got to do it, they'll say, no, let me explain something to you. Many people have been burned personally from a lack of understanding of this material. It affects who we can hire, who we can retain, the ability to get partners, the trust of our customers. This goes far deeper than checking boxes and filling out forms.
So this is about the why of compliance. How our decisions impact the rest of the organization. This is about if we do the right thing, we're protecting ourselves, you're protecting your friends, your peers, and you're protecting the company and the brand.
Yes, it's getting back at this all ties together, influence. You want to influence as many people in the building as you can to help you and be a part of the compliance program.
You know what I found in any organization, regardless of the function, there is always a group of people that are passionate about ethics and compliance. Maybe it's because they've done community service, or maybe it's just something that they really care about. And you'll always see their hands up during training, asking great questions. And they're going to, I think, naturally want to be that champion.
This is where I tend to get a little cynical. I actually, I know you didn't mean to do this, but I kind of stand a little corrected. I made it sound like we got to convince all these people don't understand. The truth is closer to what you said. And is in fact, when I hired people for SCCE and HCCA, I would talk to them about everything that you would normally talk to them about the job. But I'd also take a moment to say, have you ever had an interest in working for a company that was more focused on helping humanity or make the world a little better place? Excuse me. And you could tell when they lit up a little bit. And I said, well, I doubt you're going to find a place more like that than us. So the point would be is to go find those folks and spend a little more time with them, and then they'll rub off on others.
Excellent. Well, Roy, I hate to do this to you, but we're going to have to talk about your chapter, College Pranks Gone Wrong. And you describe in nail-biting terms some of your academic activities outside the classroom. But in all seriousness, it's to shine a light on how when you work with others to address their mistakes, to remember your own. And obviously this is something very personal to me. I was recently in the Nordic countries, and someone described it as, let's look into the mirror instead of the law book for some solutions. Now, Roy, that's not always intuitive or easy for anyone, no matter what their role. So, Roy, why do you think that it's important that someone should embrace their flaws to help others?
Well, let me share a little bit about the story that you're referring to. I was my second year at Michigan State. I was in a dorm named Shaw Hall. I carried out a few too many college pranks, and I enjoyed when I got retaliated against in a fun way. Another prank on me. I took great joy in escalating my retaliation to their retaliation, and at one particular point, it went horribly wrong. It involved a bunch of folks, guys that I convinced to be involved in water balloons and
slippery floors.
A slippery floor. A guy hit a door. Luckily, there was a wood frame, but most of it was glass. It shattered. He slipped in the water, fell down, and I spent the next 10 minutes picking glass out of his arm with the dorm supervisor, who happened to be living right next door to this thing that didn't work. She heard the noise. And then my roommate was boxing in a study lounge and hit his head on a chair really hard, and while I was tending to him, all of a sudden ambulance showed up and campus police, and they noticed a sign from the Dean of Agriculture and Natural Resources, door sign in my dorm room, and he said, "Who's that?" And I said, "That's mine." And he started to read me my rights as they were wheeling my roommate out on a stretcher, and I interrupted him, which probably wasn't the smartest thing in the world to do. I said, "They're wheeling my roommate out on a stretcher." I admitted, this is my sign, or, I possess it inappropriately. Can we handle this another time? And standing in the doorway is the same dorm supervisor that helped me pick glass out of Larry's arm in her sink in her apartment. And she whispered in my ear as I walked by, "If you need any help, let me know." And that really was peculiar to me. And then about 6 months later, there was a call for applications for dorm resident assistants. The next year I applied. I swear the process took a couple of months. I made it through what I recall was 6 rounds of cuts from about 100 people down to 11 for 7 positions or something like that. And the last interview was with the dorm supervisor on her couch, and she said, "Do you have any questions?" And I kind of answered and asked every question known to mankind. And I just said, yeah, what am I doing here?
Yeah.
You
Let's get this over with.
look at the elephant in the room. Let's chat. And I said, the thing with Larry and my roommate and the sign. And she says, yeah, well, we talked about that. And we said, we thought you handled that well.
Yeah.
And you're going to be potentially an RA on floor and help guys through similar problems. And we need that skill. And they actually picked me. And I was an RA. And actually, that was a really unbelievably helpful leadership experience for me at a very young age. I think it was helpful. But the message that I try to bring with this lesson is that we all have things in our past that didn't go so well. and some of us learn from them and use that to be even better. When we see people get into trouble and we have to investigate them and maybe end up disciplining, it's a really, the best, most effective compliance professionals I see always have empathy through the whole process. Okay. Always finish, discipline if discipline is necessary,
sure.
But they're always trying to understand it from that person's perspective and keeping it in mind and managing it accordingly. And we're not just running up and down the hall swinging a baseball bat.
So it's really trying to embrace your own humanity to say, look, what you did is regrettable.
Yeah.
But let's talk about it because it might be forgivable.
There's a plenty of people who hit the wall, make a mistake, and learn quickly and use it to their advantage in a strange sort of way.
Yeah.
And we just need to remember that when we go through this process of trying to prevent, find, and fix ethical and regulatory problems.
Do you think that's part of a compliance leader saying, you know what, we understand that ethical decision-making can sometimes be tricky,
Yeah.
and we embrace and understand the complexity of decision-making. This is about us helping you to hit the pause button when you need to hit the pause button and reach out for support. Is that part of sort of embracing that this is not an easy issue?
Here, related to that, Richard, is a story of, again, one of the most effective compliance professionals I've ever met has shared a few times. And before I say this, it frustrates me when people just say, build an ethical culture, everything will be fine.
Right.
Just tell everybody to do the right thing. We really don't need compliance. Go beyond compliance to ethics. It infuriates me. We have to audit, monitor, investigate.
Operationalize it.
Right. Prevent, find, and fix problems. Because frankly, there's some people out there making mistakes, some very serious mistakes, who have no clue that what they're doing is against the law. And he shares a story about a wonderful woman that worked in their organization who would get forms without a doctor's name on it. She knew who the doctor was. She would fill in the doctor's name, and it turns out that's an incredibly bad move.
Yeah.
And there was an audit by the government, and the enforcement community came in and accused them of terrible wrongdoing. And here was this otherwise, well, no, not otherwise. There was this perfect human being who thought she was being ethical all day long, but didn't know the rule of law, which is why just telling people to do the right thing doesn't work, and why empathy is a great thing to have. I don't know all the details. I know this guy really well that was the compliance officer at the time, and I bet you $12 he defended her against anybody who thought she needed to be sent a bigger message than whatever it is he could send her and be able to check the box if discipline was done appropriately.
Yeah, a great point and a good ending point that if you want to develop those interpersonal skills and get people talking to you before it's too late, like that example, sometimes it means showing some vulnerability, humility, and humanity. So Roy, thank you. I'm looking forward to the next part of our interview, and we're going to talk about how we can help the compliance generalists.
Thank you, sir.
Look forward to it.